Great. Well, thanks for joining me, and thanks to everyone who is on the call. This week, we are talking about marketing through more uncertainty and what's next as we reopen, which in Kansas City is of particular import to us because Kansas City is officially at least partially back open for business. And so I appreciate you joining us this week, Dave, who's our president and CEO, and Corey is taking the week off. So my name's Natalie Jackson, and I will be here to host in his stead. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. How are you feeling so far about Kansas City being open, and what's the best way, do you think, for businesses to communicate what their companies are doing in regards to keeping people safe? What have you seen? What do you think's working, and what guidance can you offer?
Yeah, well, first of all, for the Kansas City market, I think people are appropriately sort of slow rolling back to the office, which is some of the early adopters, let's call them, will be the ones that will be jumping back in full force and seeing how things go. And I think a substantial portion of the population is going to be take a little more conservative stance and wait 2, 3, 4 weeks and see if there aren't any changes to the numbers that can help us build confidence for safety and the safety of those around us. So I think you're going to see it slowly roll in. There's not going to be any massive flood, and if you're in a business that's dependent on foot traffic, it's going to come back gradually. It's not going to come back super fast. So I think that as I look at it and from a marketing perspective, I was able to sit on a Gartner call last week, and they were talking about specifically SaaS marketing and marketing of folks that have a product like ours, which is a marketing automation platform. What they emphasized was that it's far less about features and functions. What things do you have to offer, and what are the bells and whistles around those things? And it is far more about building confidence. And I think that that strikes pretty close to home for the service industry like we're in, or software industry, but I think it's even far more important for anybody whose business who has been suffering because you literally can't get bodies in the door. You've been restricted for reasons outside of your control. And how do you build confidence? And it's not just about, hey, we're open. That is an important message, but it is, we're open, and here are the circumstances around which we are opening. So what are you doing in particular to help keep your customers safe when they come in? What are you doing, to keep your employees safe while they're working? And what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to behave when I come in to shop or to dine or whatever it is that I'm there to do? And you have to give me and all consumers, I think at this point, some level of confidence that you're acknowledging what's going on. You have a set of rules. You've set something up. You're not just winging it. That you're playing by those rules, and that you also understand what the rules are in each and every market that you're in. So, if you're a one unit location, then you just have to communicate about that one place of business that you're in, and what the rules are there. You have to communicate that you understand what the governing bodies have set up as your set of rules. So as a hair salon, what's your set of rules for opening? As a restaurant, what's your set of rules for opening? As a gym, what's your set of rules for opening? And as a business or a law firm, what are your set of rules for opening? And in some cases, you're barely impacted at all, and in some cases, you're significantly impacted. And then communicate, understand those rules, and then communicate how you're different if you're different. And I would highly encourage anybody, if you're going to be different, lean to the conservative side, right? Don't break the rules. Don't say, we're not going to put dining table 6 feet apart. We just don't like that idea. It doesn't suit our establishment well. That's probably not a good message to send. That's a I don't really care message. What you should be doing instead is saying the rules say we're supposed to have tables that are 6 feet apart. Here's how we're doing that, and on top of that, we're doing XYZ to make sure that you're safe.
And that's a great point. Do you think, one of the things that a lot of, especially email marketers, were talking about at the beginning of the pandemic, when you started to see things get closed down, was there was this form letter email that it seemed like almost every business was sending that was like, here's how we're responding to the pandemic. we're probably going to start seeing an influx of those again as people start to reopen, right? And I think the big question that came from that surge of emails was, does everyone need to send one of these? And in that regard, are there certain types of companies that maybe should communicate more than others? And are there some that maybe like, hey, sit this one out, you probably don't need to re-communicate how you're opening or what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And the bottom line is that that's the first question you should ask is, do I even need to communicate anything as it relates to COVID and reopening? I think there's a large chunk or large percentage of businesses that just don't need to communicate anything. For example, if you're like us, if you're marketing and advertising a SaaS company, the fact that we're returning to the office really has almost no impact on our customers, with a very few exceptions. And those would be, are we going to be having face-to-face meetings? And that's about the only reason that I can think of, do we need to communicate? And that's probably not a mass communication, right? For all the customers that we have that are not in our market, that never come to our office anyway, they don't need to know, or do they necessarily care so much that we are going to postpone face-to-face, or that all meetings are going to be via Zoom or GoToMeeting. So I'm not going to create extra noise by deploying a campaign that says, hey, here's what we're doing. I think that the few people that do care what we're doing would be other businesses that are like us, and that those are probably direct conversations between me and their team, or our operations team and their operations team, and it's more of a, hey, we're just trying to learn from businesses like ours. What are you guys doing? But in terms of marketing to our customers that here's our COVID position for the next 6 months, I think that's just creating noise.
Sure, and probably a good argument for, especially on the B2B side, segmentation, right? You probably do want to tell your clients if it's relevant,
Absolutely.
but you don't need to tell your prospect list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this whole time has been a really massive eye-opening experience for a lot of folks that don't have their CRM in order and they don't have their email database in order. Is, wow, I really wish I could send a message to only those clients who are located within a 50-mile radius, who might be trying to plan a visit to us, who are our clients that use our agency services but not our software services. Wouldn't it be great if I could query my database and pull that list really quickly? And I think a lot of people are getting hit head on with the fact that they can't do that, or that they don't have the contact information that they wish they did. And so this should be, I think, a fantastic opportunity for people to put some practices in place and start enforcing those practices for keeping great data, keeping a CRM and keeping great data in that CRM.
So that's another a great point that here we're kind of coming around to phase 2 of uncertainty, right? We had phase 1 was unexpected, right? Everybody was sent home. Phase 2, we're at least a little bit more prepared in that we know what data points we might need. So for example, to your point, if you've got managing marketing for a multi-location business, maybe a restaurant or retail or something, now more than ever you're going, oh my gosh, I wish I had a preferences center where I knew what your favorite location was. So as we roll into maybe looking future forward, and there's a good potential that we could be sent back home again and then have to go through this whole process in the fall. If that happens, what are some things that marketers can do now to proactively collect the data without violating any laws, in preparation for data points that they maybe didn't have the first time around that they wish they had?
Yeah, so that's a great great subject. So I think one is, if you find yourself with incomplete, let's be nice and just call it incomplete data, when in fact it's probably a lot worse than incomplete, then you need to get out front of this now. Now is the time to start figuring out what is your process. So you go at it in the most efficient, least cost effort that you can and try innovation. And so you've got an email database and it's only email. Now might be information, you need time to try and get that data augmented voluntarily by deploying email campaigns and explaining, hey, why do you want this information? If you're B2B and you're asking me for a home email or a home address, that's highly unusual, and probably would be mostly unheard of until now, where it kind of makes sense that you might need to actually send me something to my home address. address.
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit.
If you're going to go out and you're going to reach out for that information, you got to give me launch a campaign to me and see what kind of a response rate you get. You there for a second?
Yeah, you cut out. You're back.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. I don't know how much I cut out. I'm just going to continue on. But I think another thing that I think is important to consider is that if you have multiple locations and you have, up until now, you have not done a good job of using any sort of listing management service to manage all your information online very quickly, you probably ought to get to one. And some of them operate differently than others. Some of them allow real-time updates of what are your business hours. I can update them now, and they're going to populate across dozens of search engines to indicate what my business hours are. And some of them take a while to propagate, and a while could be 30 to 60 days, at which case right now, that's almost a useless feature, because in 30 to 60 days, stuff's going to change and you don't know what direction it's going to change. So I think that putting something in place like that right now is probably a good practice. Putting some sort of a semi-permanent location on your website that explains, that is there as a resource to say, look, here's our stance, here's what we're doing. Now, you don't necessarily need to push that out to people, but have something there for the folks that are going to go look for it. I would say don't make it too invasive. I don't think you need, in most cases, unless you're expecting me to come into your location, I don't think you need to throw a pop-up in front of me when I visit your website. But having somewhere that's relatively clear for me to go to understand what the circumstances for you and for me as a customer are pretty darn important right now.
Sure. And I think there's even, if we took a step further back, there are even, I think, a number of businesses, and I think particularly on the B2C side, where there wasn't as much importance around gathering emails for location-based businesses. So if you're in a situation where maybe you had a restaurant and it was a big popular local restaurant or a brick and mortar store, and you really weren't focused on gathering emails, and now you're going, gosh, I really wish I had the emails of the people who love me so I could tell them about curbside pickup and let them know when I'm reopening. What are some even basic tips that you could give to some companies like that who maybe don't even have an acquisition strategy around email?
Yeah, I would lean heavily into social channels right now to try and draw that audience back in. So hopefully, most companies at this point have focused on some of their channels to build an audience around them, but now it's time to leverage those social channels to gain better access to your customers. So one of the things is a flat out request for can we get your email address so that we can communicate with you? And of course, with that, you need to make some promises as to that you're not going to abuse that relationship. Why, once again, why do you want it? How do you intend to use it? So getting out to those social channels, and then you certainly can't reach everybody through your social channels either, but you could certainly look at some paid strategies around boosting your audience. So taking that audience and growing it through lookalikes and from your custom audiences is a big step forward in reaching those people who are your customers, yet you currently have no way to connect with them. So I think social is a big piece of this.
Sure. And you mentioned something, let's move back to B2B real quick too. I mean, that obviously is something that you and I talk a lot about, right? And so one of the things as a B2B marketer that's particularly challenging, I think right now, is that when you look at people rolling back to semi-normalcy, we're now facing a marketplace where there's not any real predictability as to who is still working from home, what companies are still working from home, and how to best reach people. So you mentioned briefly, let's say I want to send somebody something as part of maybe an account-based marketing campaign. How do I organically and not be creepy about it, ask them to share their home address so that I might send them something? I think, it's really kind of a big challenge to think through as a B2B marketer. What does my sales and marketing funnel look like now where I have zero predictability as to who is in what location? Are there any tips or anything that you would share with B2B marketers about how to address a fragmented marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, so the easiest way I think to kind of wrap your head around what this feels like is to put yourself on the receiving side of marketing from a B2B company right now from a work from home experience. And what I would hope for from a company that's trying to reaching at home, other than just through digital means, is 100% transparency, right? And build confidence in why is it that you need my home address, right? And what do you intend to do with that? And so you're just going to have to be incredibly straightforward with the ask, which is, hey, look, we're running a marketing campaign, or here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the message about XYZ service. And to do that, we want to send you something, whatever it is that we're sending, that we think is relevant to you. And we'd like to get your permission to do that first, and promise you that, this is how and why we will communicate with you. And we certainly would never sell your data. Those kinds of things are the kinds of things that I would want to hear from a B2B marketer. And so the really, really tough part about that is that necessitates having a relationship of some kind. That person is willing to at least have some form of conversation with you. And as you know, in the B2B space, a lot of what we're doing is reaching out to customers who have not heard of us, or who may have know our name but have never done business with us. And reaching them in normal times is difficult. Now reaching them is even more difficult as well. And then add to that the extra layer of, oh, by the way, I'd like your home address. And I would not expect killer results. I wouldn't expect huge conversion rates of people willing to give up their home address. But the ones that do, the fact that you got that far into a conversation with them tells me that that's a pretty good prospect, and that's probably someone worth investing in. So whatever it is that you're sending to them, now's the time to make the creative shine and make the message shine, and keeping in mind that whatever that message is, go back to the thought that we started this conversation with, is right? Build my confidence in you more than showing me your bells and whistles. How do I know that what I'm doing is a good idea? Ended on the idea of just building confidence in me with whatever you're sending to me.
Sure. And I think another point that's come up a couple times too, that's probably worth repeating, is the importance of transparency. When we're facing so much uncertainty in the marketplace, in terms of where people are, in terms of what we can and can't do, I feel like right now is a really good time for marketers to shine with transparent messaging, right? So you've mentioned it with like data acquisition, being sure that you're telling people how and why you're asking for the data that you're asking for and what you intend to do with it. Which is probably something we should be doing anyway, but this might be a good time for us to really refocus on transparency, on what we do with data, on sharing how we use data, and being good stewards of that data. Are there any tip points that you would want to give around data stewardship if you're going to be asking for more data points in order to do your job in times like this?
Yeah, it's not going to be a whole lot different than what you have to do anyway. So, a lot of the topics we've talked about over the last few years have surrounded consumer privacy and data privacy laws and regulations that are coming out just at a breakneck speed. There are just new ones all the time, and the nuances of those are changing all the time. So if you're trying to keep up with every state's regulations around privacy, what you've done is you've probably set some baseline fundamentals of how you keep and store data, and whether or not you share data, and how you keep people informed about what you're doing. None of that changes here, right? But what does change is that there's probably more interest in that. It spikes with the news for sure. So as somebody comes out with a law and the news talks about a law, there's more and more interest about it. And then we kind of tend, as consumers, we kind of tend to forget about it. There's still the brands that hopefully we know and trust. But then something like this comes up again, and suddenly you got a B2B marketer asking me for a home address, and I probably once again care what you're doing with that data. So you need to make sure that you're following all the best practices around having a privacy statement online, having some notice at the time of data collection as to what you plan to do with that data, and in most cases, you shouldn't be sharing that data. It's pretty rare that your business needs to share that data unless it's with a provider that's helping you get to better targeting, but you're certainly not selling that data or brokering that data in most cases. And if you are, you really need to be transparent about that.
Yeah, great. I think that's a good reminder for us now. If anything, we should refocus and say, hey, let's be good stewards of our data that we're asking for. One of the things that we talked about 6 weeks ago, so this is week 6 for us of doing this series, and one of the things we talked about 6 weeks ago was how you really ought to be checking your automations, particularly if you're in a situation where some of your automations are referencing things that happen in person, whether it's a meeting request or an in-store redemption. Obviously, as we see a kind of a very fragmented rollback into in-person activities like that, is now a good time to go check your automations yet again. And then as a follow-up to that, what are some things that marketers can do to be more nimble when it comes to checking automations, revising campaigns, having to turn and spin up new things very quickly to face a new landscape? Are there some things?
Yeah, so that's great stuff. You definitely should. You definitely need to be looking in again, right? It's time, because things have now shifted or started shifting across the board for most of us. And so now is the time to go in and say, what did I change? And do I need to change it back? Or do I need to change it partially back? And study everything you've done. But it's also probably that first wave going through is probably a really good wake-up call for those companies that do have a lot of marketing automation running. It is easy to set it and forget it. And if you don't realize what your welcome series is doing, or you don't have someone that owns that and the messaging behind that, and that is constantly aware of what's going on and the volume of information that's going out through this automation, you better put somebody in place, and you better have somebody in place, because it's getting easier and easier to do, and people are doing more and more of it. And as a result, the messaging is getting more complex to manage. You can do thousands of iterations of things in a single campaign if you choose to do it that way. It also becomes really difficult to manage messaging as you get more and more stuff going. So I think that you have to have, at this point, somebody that's a dedicated resource, or that a portion of their time is dedicated to understanding and owning the flow of messaging through automation, and who it's targeting, so that you can get in there systematically and modify things. Right now, yeah, you ought to be in looking to see, if I change stuff back in March, do I need to tweak it again? Probably. You probably can back off of the overt COVID-19 subject line in every single email. That's kind of run its course, and probably was overdone by a lot of companies to begin with. But how should your messaging change, and how can you get towards more normal messaging, more normal conversations with your customers and your prospects?
What does normal look like in terms of messaging? I mean, how far should I lean into my brand voice, and should I still be sensitive to the landscape?
Yeah, you definitely have to be sensitive to the landscape, but also you don't want to vary too far from your brand voice, right? You are who you are. That shouldn't change, and I don't think consumers would expect it to drastically change, with the exception of being sensitive to what's going on around you. And that's probably true, and that's true in all times. Be sensitive to what's going on around you, and what your voice is. And if your voice is on the edge, if you're one of those folks, then you might do a double check to where the edge is right now, and what kinds of things maybe you should hold back on, where you might have been more bold going forward before.
Sure. And so just to kind of close us out as we come up to the half of an hour, I think one of the toughest things right now, and I'll say even for myself, is that we went into 2020 with a good marketing plan. We had a strategy in place. We were ready to go. We felt really good about that strategy. And of course, come about early March, it just got turned on its head. And so I think now more than ever, this idea that marketers should be nimble and be ready to shift and transform messaging, and that digital marketing enables us to do that. I think that now more than ever, that's a time to embrace that. But what are some ways or some guidance that you can give to marketers about how do you become more nimble? What are some things you can do so that you're ever evolving, even in times like this?
Yeah, so I'll lock it into the sort of the digital space, right, which is where we live. But It's to really nail your fundamentals. You need to be great at marketing automation. You need to be great at paid media. You need to be great at social. You need to be great at all the things at their fundamental level, and you need to spend probably less time chasing the marketing unicorns of the world, the viral wins that or the idea that one influencer is going to dramatically impact your brand. This is not. You're not going to go out and it's not like Oprah is out there waiting to promote your brand, and that you just got to get that phone call through to her. It's lean on the fundamentals heavily and be great at them, so that you can tweak them when it's time to tweak them for whatever comes next. And so you can adjust them for the current circumstances, and you can adjust them for the next thing that comes along, because something else will come along. And just being great at the fundamentals is going to give you the capacity to be nimble.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week, Dave.
Sure.
I do want to just share with everyone else a couple of things. So as we look at what's next, we still have our marketing therapy sessions. If you're interested and you just want 30 minutes to talk to a marketer, I'll be the first to say I don't live with any marketers, so I'm always happy to talk to anyone about marketing, given that we're still in a work from home situation. You can also subscribe to learn about our upcoming events and receive some ongoing coverage about these kinds of tips and tricks by signing up for our newsletters, and the link is there. Next week's Memorial Day, so we will not be here for weekly Emsights on Monday. However, we will relaunch the following week, and we're probably going to do more of a bi-weekly schedule, or maybe once a month. So if you do have some questions you'd still like for us to cover, or some topics that you'd like for us to cover, please feel free to send those our way. And thank you so much for joining this week. Have a great week, everyone.